Hi class, and welcome to our second virtual lecture on communication and culture. I think that you will find this to be an interesting and relevant topic, and a lot of times students tell me they have an aha moment when they realize the differences that they're having in communicating with someone is actually not the overt things that a culture does communication-wise, but some of the things that are more subtle and underneath the surface. So we're going to discover and discuss that. So the first thing we need to do is define what culture is. Culture is the language, values, beliefs, traditions, and customs that people share and learn. Culture influences your beliefs, your values, your worldviews, and is often reflected in your language, your nonverbal communication, which can include the way that you dress, the tone of voice that you use, and how you relate to others as well. It's also important to talk about what intercultural communication is. Intercultural communication is the process that occurs when members of two or more cultures exchange messages in a manner that's influenced by their different cultural perceptions and symbol systems, both verbal and nonverbal as well. It's also important to talk about the concept of subculture or co-culture as well. Social scientists use this term co-culture to describe the perception of a membership in a group that is part of an encompassing culture. Co-cultures in North American society include categories based on a number of factors, including age, race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, nationality, geographic region, physical disability, religion, and activity. Members of co-cultures develop unique patterns of communication and connection. Deaf culture is a good example. The shared experiences of deafness can create strong bonds, and signing offers a shared language. There are deaf schools, deaf competitions, deaf performing arts, etc. So why is it important to study intercultural communication? The world is now a global village. It's interconnected more than ever, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic when we've been connected by all of our new technologies. You can have a meeting in Japan in real time via Skype in the modern world. We're also economically integrated. That's something that we've also seen as a huge dynamic during the global pandemic. And our social dynamics. Chances are you come into contact with individuals from other cultures on a regular basis. Some cultural influences on communication are obvious. However, some are far less visible. Values and norms can shape how members of cultures think and act. As you think about the cultural values and norms described here, you may realize that they are not necessarily differences in nationality. In today's increasingly multicultural society, people differ from different cultural backgrounds are likely to encounter one another at home in the country they share. For example, high versus low context cultures. A high context culture relies heavily on subtle, often nonverbal cues to maintain social harmony. High context communicators pay close attention to nonverbal behaviors, the history of the relationships, and the social rules that govern their interaction. Low context culture uses language primarily to express thoughts, feelings, and ideas as directly as possible. To low context communicators, the meaning of a statement lies in the words spoken. Mainstream cultures in the United States, Canada, and Northern Europe fall into the low context end of the scale. On the high context end of the scale, we have Asian and Middle Eastern mainstream cultures as well. Individualism versus collectivism. Some cultures value the individual, whereas others place greater emphasis on the group. Members of an individualistic culture view their primary responsibility as helping themselves. Whereas communicators in collectivist cultures feel loyalties and obligations to in-groups, extended family, the community, or even organizations. Power distance is another important cultural value and norm. Power distance is the degree to which members of a society accept an unequal distribution of power. Currently, that's what we're seeing in the United States in the marches for social justice. For the most part, the United States has been a fairly low power distance culture, and it seems like things have gotten a little bit authoritarian, and as a result, the marches and whatnot are happening. So cultures with low power distance believe in minimizing distinction between various social classes, whereas high power distance cultures such as North Korea or some of the other authoritarian countries believe in that separation, like a monarchy or a dictatorship. The degree of power distance in a culture is reflected in key relationships: children, obedience, on-the-job communication, etc. Uncertainty avoidance. Hofstede uses the term uncertainty avoidance to reflect the levels of discomfort or threat that people feel in response to ambiguous situations and how much they try to avoid them. He developed an uncertainty avoidance index called the UAI to measure those levels. His work has shown that residents of some countries, including Singapore, Great Britain, Denmark, Sweden, Hong Kong, and the United States, are less threatened by change and ambiguity than others, such as Belgium, Greece, and Portugal. Finally, achievement versus nurturing. The term achievement culture describes societies that place a high value on material success and a focus on the task at hand. By contrast, a nurturing culture regards the support of relationships as an especially important goal. Point, you probably have a healthy appreciation for the challenges that arise when people try to communicate interpersonally and interculturally. These challenges become even greater when the communicators use different verbal and nonverbal communication systems. So language and identity within verbal codes. The names a culture uses to identify its members reflect its values and shape the way the members relate to each other. If you live in a culture where everyone speaks the same language, you may not notice how it affects your view. But what happens when some members of society speak a dominant language while others speak a minority one? The speakers of the non-dominant language can be pressured to assimilate, or they can decide not to speak in the majority language at all. Verbal communication styles. Using language is more than just a matter of choosing a particular group of words to convey an idea. Each language has its own unique style that distinguishes it from others. This can include how much formal or informal there is in the language, how direct it is versus whether it's indirect, elaborate versus succinct, or formal versus informal. Additionally, there are nonverbal differences in our intercultural communication, and many elements of nonverbal communication are shared by all humans, but some of them are different. For example, the amount of space, although during COVID-19, 6 feet is the space, but personal space, eye contact, etc. all vary from culture to culture. Finally, we have code switching. Code switching is a form of communication competence that increases the chances of achieving your goals. Communicators often adapt their manner of speaking when they change context. So when they go from culture to culture, and I'm sure many of you are skilled code switchers if you know more than one language. What distinguishes competent from incompetent intercultural communicators? In the rest of this chapter, we focus on answering the question. But before we get to the answers, let's talk about communication competence in general. If you'll remember, the basic qualities that communication scholars agree on are the empathy, the self-reflection, the self-monitoring, being able to choose the right tool from your tool belt to achieve your goals. And within intercultural communication, it includes motivation and attitude, the tolerance for ambiguity, which is putting aside our uncertainty and fears, being open-minded, so being comfortable with ambiguity and having an open mind will help you to interact competently with people from other backgrounds. Knowledge and skill. Attitude alone isn't enough to guarantee success in intercultural encounters. Communicators need to possess knowledge of other cultures and know what approaches are appropriate. The ability to shift gears and adapt one's style to the norms of another culture or co-culture is an essential ingredient of this communication competence. Also, becoming comfortable and confident in a new culture or co-culture may be ultimately rewarding, but the process is not easy. It requires a great deal of patience and a great deal of perseverance to achieve. Thanks. That is the conclusion of Chapter 2.